Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stephen King Cast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week, I'll review one entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in the chronological order of publication, and what I've been doing lately is focusing on the television adapted works of Stephen King, which, for this particular stretch, includes a re-release of some older episodes that I have done with a new introduction, like I'm doing today. But we're gonna get to look forward to some new reviews of some TV miniseries and shows that I never touched upon in the previous 10 plus years of this podcast. So in the weeks to come, you can look forward to a review of Tommyknockers, a review of the Steven Weber starring The Shining, the Stephen King approved version of The Shining, I like to call it, as well as once we start to switch over to what Stephen King adaptations have looked like on streaming, I'll be able to cover Lisey's story with a re-release and re-examination of the novel Lisey's story, and I'll get into that once we start talking about Lisey's stories a little bit. And the Institute as well, because there's definitely been some glaring errors in what I have or have not covered when it comes to the adapted television works of Stephen King. I'll talk about Chapelwaite as well, because I think that Chapelwaite is definitely something worth really looking at there. And today, we're going to talk about the Langoliers. This was a fun episode to do. Let's be real, let's be honest, this is not a good movie. This was coming in the heyday of the Stephen King ABC TV miniseries adaptations, which began with It, and with It really put Pennywise the Dancing Clown on the map. It reignited Stephen King for a brand new audience, because prior to this, audience has known Stephen King as a bookseller for sure, the king of horror for sure, but so much of his works had been adapted to the big screen, and we were used to, blood-drenched Carrie White, and axe-wielding Jack Nicholson, and killer cars, and slop-covered St. Bernards trying to maul everyone that it can get into. Drew Barrymore setting people on fire. So many of the works were, known as movie-going experiences, and this transition to television allowed people to see a little bit more of what Stephen King truly was, not as a concept artist, by which I mean, by translating these novels to the big screen, you have a very limited amount of time to get to the heart of things. And so the concept is what sells it. It's a killer car. It's a girl who can light things on fire with her mind. It is about a haunted mangler device, machine washing device. It is about a murderous father in a haunted hotel. But with these ABC TV miniseries, it starts to be able to shine a light on what makes Stephen King, which is not this quote unquote master of horror, but a master of character, a master of the heart, a master of blending these large concepts with the human heart and how we all connect together, which is something that Stephen King fans know about him, and maybe TV audiences less so. Prior to the arrival of the Langoliers, audiences have gotten a glimpse of this with Rob Reiner, and rest in peace, Rob Reiner, with his adaptation of The Body, which is more famously known as Stand By Me. I have re-released my episode a few months ago following the death of Rob Reiner, so feel free to go listen to my original thoughts as well as my new thoughts, contextualizing the life and legacy of Rob Reiner and what he was able to give to audiences and what he was able to show with Stephen King. But prior, I would say that the release of Stand By Me is it's an exception to the rule of what audiences understood about Stephen King. And then once we start to get into it and The Stand, we see that there is so much room for character, and this is what Stephen King has always excelled at. So we're able to start to really spend some time with the characters and live with the characters, and then when the horrors do appear, we feel more for the characters because we care about them that much more because they're brought to life just due to the sheer nature that we're able to spend more time with them. So that is something that worked very well in the transition from movies to television. Clearly, it worked for It worked for The Stand. It worked to a certain degree with Tommyknockers. I need to revisit Tommyknockers, so stay tuned to my thoughts on that. And then there's The Langoliers. Listen, by no means is this a good movie. The effects, I mean, it's worth watching. I mean, the effects are really bad. When the title character, the Langoliers themselves show up, it is rough to look at. This is a very high concept Stephen King story in which a group of travelers on a plane get lost in time. And what's interesting is that this, predates Lost. But this idea of waking up to discover people gone, and it's all plane based. There's a ticking time clock urgency to this with what do you do in this situation? The fact that they all wake up after having been asleep and they are stuck together. They're all different types of people, having to learn each other and figure each other out. It's a great concept. Having things just be a little bit off, and when they land, and having everything be emptied and vacant. It's horrifying. It's terrifying. It's unsettling. It's a great Twilight Zone concept, and I applaud them for taking this idea to make into a movie, because if they were able to pull it off, great. But they decided to make a television movie that requires them to visualize and literalize the time-eating balls of teeth at a time when the technology was just not there on the small screen. I don't even know if it's there on the small screen or the big screen now. It's an image that I think works on the page, it works in our minds, but when you try to literalize that, I don't know if that's going to work. There's a sequence in Twin Peaks: The Return that came out in 2017, in which Dale Cooper, still trapped in the Black Lodge, starts to get shaken by the shifting reality that he finds himself in, and the chevron pattern on the Black Lodge floor starts to go up and down, and there is non-existence all around him. There are ways to visualize what non-existence looks like, and him about to fall out of reality. There's a horrifying quality to that is visualized very, very well. I just don't know if the action of these rotating teeth balls, these buzzsaw orbs, chewing through a digital landscape is what's going to be able to convey that. You have to have a firm precision and firm control over the special effects and the story that's being told to really pull it off. And I don't know if they were able to truly make that work. And unfortunately, The Langoliers is not considered one of the greatest Stephen King adaptations, and nor should it be, but it is definitely one very much of its time. That if you just want a look back at the early to mid 90s and what style and fashion and sensibilities were like, and what acting was expected to be on the small screen, take a look at The Langoliers. It's an experience. It's a nice little time capsule, and it really just contextualizes and puts into place what Stephen King stories were at that time and place. So if you have any thoughts on the Langoliers, write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. If there are any television adaptations that I have not touched upon that you think that I should cover, please let me know so I can start to prepare for that. Like I said, look forward to episodes on the Stephen King approved version of The Shining. You can look forward to the Tommyknockers. I realized that I never did a review of the Tommyknockers TV miniseries ever. I don't know what happened there, but I went to go, listen to it and record some new thoughts on it. And I realized that it doesn't exist. So you're gonna get a brand new episode with a full deep dive on the Jimmy Smits starring version from ABC back in the day. So I'll talk about that. And like I said, well, I'll do a review of Chapelwaite, of Lisi's story, of The Institute. You'll get revised reviews on The Outsider and 1922 and Gerald's Game, movies that have dropped on streaming. So there's a lot of good stuff looking to look ahead to stay and keep in the world of being able to watch Stephen King at home, whether that was us sitting down and watching him in the 1990s or sitting down and firing him up on Netflix in the 2000s. So if you have any thoughts, write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. You can follow me on Instagram. You can follow me on Facebook. You can follow me on TikTok. You can follow me on Blue Sky. So I am all over the place on the socials for Stephen King info dumps, lore, and Stephen Kingisms. You can find me making the vids on TikTok. And like I said, if you have any time on your hands, please write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com to share your thoughts, or a review on iTunes would really help me out as well. So, all right, everyone, thank you for listening to this preamble. And without further ado, here I present to you the Stephen King cast review of The Langoliers.
Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah. Someone's in the kitchen, I know, ho, ho, ho. Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah, strumming on the old banjo and singing flea.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stephen King cast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week I'll review one entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in the chronological order of publication, and this week I'm continuing my examination of the novella collection 4 Past Midnight with the follow-up to the review of the story The Langoliers. This week I'm examining the 2-part ABC TV miniseries from 1995 starring David Morse, Dean Stockwell, and Bronson Pinchot. Now, look, I am clearly a fan of Stephen King. I host a weekly podcast, and in many of those weeks, I'll release multiple episodes. I'm enough of a fan to commit myself to these reviews and recordings, so at the end of the day, yes, I'm a fan. But being a fan does not mean that you have to like everything that comes out by a particular artist. In fact, I'd argue that if you blindly love something without weighing it against other entries in an artist's collection, you aren't a fan at all. The reason I say this is because I did not want to review this miniseries. At all. The novella was fun. I liked the novella, even if the internal logic and character motivations somewhat felt forced. But just because Stephen King writes something doesn't mean that should be made into a movie or a TV miniseries. I mean, I know that at this point, most of the publications had already been snatched up, but still, The Langoliers is a strange choice. It's a hard sell, even for King fans. And if you're going to make it into a movie, stretching it across 2 different episodes is a lot to ask. So, to make a long story short, I was not looking forward to watching this. How was the experience? Well, you're going to have to keep listening to find out. First, I'm going to read a listener email. You know I love getting emails from you guys, so just keep it coming. If you have time to write an email, head on over to and subscribe to the podcast through iTunes and write a review while you're at it. The more reviews and subscriptions I get, the easier it'll be for people to find the podcast. So, the email. This is from Wes, and Wes writes, "Hello again. I'm jumping all over the place with your podcast, and right now I'm just a few minutes into your review of Revival. You said something that I wanted to comment on and wholeheartedly agree with you. You mentioned some of his more recent books like Doomakey and Lisey's Story and how you didn't feel that they were stories for you when you were in your early 20s. But when you read them later in life, or read them later in life, there will be a lot for you to pick up. I think you're 100% dead on. A little background on my time as a constant reader. I honestly can't remember how old I was when I read my first King book or what it was, but it was somewhere around the time I was 10 or 11. By the time I had gotten to high school in 1987, I had read everything he had published up until the point and was buying his books in hardcover the day they came out. Shortly after high school, I had read everything he's written twice, and right up to the ripe old age of 42, I've always bought his books, or more often these days, ebooks, and started reading on the day of their release. With the exception of a few that have come out in the last 10 years, I've reread all of them multiple times, from It, on my 12th right now, to The Stand, 6 times for the uncut version, 2 for the original, to Bag of Bones and Hearts in Atlantis, 7 times for both, and, well, you get the point. And what's been 100% constant is that whatever age I was at the time, and what was going on in my life made each reread a whole different experience. This may sound a little odd, but given the fact that Cy King is 25 years older than I am and was once a teacher, as my dad was a reading teacher, so reading was ingrained in me from an early age, I always sort of felt that King was a father figure of sorts in my life. Maybe more of a slightly weird uncle who was great at telling spooky stories and scaring the hell out of you in the middle of the night. A few times I've made it a point to reread a King book that he had written at the same age I was. And while I'm not saying that it helped me get into his mind or anything like that, simply coming at it with the knowledge that, in a sense, we're both the same age invariably opened my eyes and my comprehension of whatever book I was reading at the time. Anyways, it seems like every time I email you, I keep wanting to say more and more, but I'm going to put a pin in it from now. I'll be emailing you more in the future, and if the nature of my emails are too rambling, I don't expect you to read them on your podcast. If you decide to, feel free to cut them up however you want, but honestly, I'm not expecting you to. That's not why I keep writing. As I said in previous emails, just great to have such a high-quality podcast dedicated to my favorite writer, and they've helped me look at his books with new and different perspectives. Long day and pleasant nights. Wes, thanks again for writing in. Keep those emails coming. These are the type of emails that I love getting because I think that's important, that we're able to share our Stephen King experiences. And this is the kind of experience that I think that we need to be able to share, and how reading Stephen King means something to us, and how they're snippets of life, and we can experience more from the books at different time periods in our lives. I think that's important. So keep them coming, guys. Keep on writing to stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. All right, guys, now here we go. I'm about to board that plane and head back through that time warp to the Langoliers. So here we go. Fun fact to start off, despite it being portrayed in LA, the airport locations were actually filmed in Bangor, and I learned that from Stu, the Stephen King Tours tour guide. I released a bonus episode about my experience on the Stephen King Tour a while ago, and I strongly recommend signing up on sk-tours.com. Sorry. So I strongly recommend signing up on sk-tours.com so you can experience being driven through the town that inspired Derry, Maine, the home of Pennywise the Dancing Clown. So the fact that they filmed the movie in King's hometown is a pretty fun tidbit of information. Unlike the novel, we don't start off with Brian. We meet Nick, our swashbuckling James Bond assassin. And one by one, we meet our other characters, Dinah, Toomey, and with Toomey, we meet another sidekick who tells us exactly why he's going to Boston and what his conflict is. So far, right away, not gonna lie, this movie is not great. We're then introduced to Brian Engel, played by Stephen King audiobook narrator David Morse. And not only was he in this Stephen King adaptation, he was also in The Green Mile. Engel learns about his ex-wife's death and the Aurora Borealis, and we pass by Toomey, who is giving an employee a hard time about the window seat. Now, Bronson Pinchot is not who I had pictured as Toomey, and the television version isn't quite who I think Toomey is, but Pinchot is one reason to watch this movie. There's not many. Then he's definitely a reason to watch it. He's phenomenal in this role. I mean, he's not going to win any awards, but he's definitely fun to watch. And he couldn't be any different from the television role that had made him famous at that point, Balky Bartakamus from Perfect Strangers. And here he's just not aggressive and dangerous. He's got this oily quality about him. He just, and the camera also likes to zoom up on his face and his sunken eyes that are just manic. It is a high point in an otherwise low experience while watching this movie. Anyway, almost right away, the movie's central threat kicks in. Just as in the novella, Dinah discovers that the plane is gone. Now, in the book, it was an incredibly tense scene because we experience it through her perspective, which is to say, through her blindness. With Dinah screaming, everyone that had been sleeping is awakened and drawn together. But not before we get some very, very primitive mid-90s special effects of the plane flying through the night sky. It's pretty rough, guys. Bronson Pinchot then gets an opportunity to chew the scenery by screaming at David Morse at the top of his lungs, which is met by Nick's nose hold, which is absurdly goofy along with everything else about this adaptation. It is so goofy that when Nick releases its hold, it comes with a sound effect to punctuate the point. While Engel takes control of the plane, Dean Stockwell forces everyone to share their name and motivation so the audience can get a sense of who these characters are. Now, I'm going to make a note right now, guys. I'm going to be honest with you. I think that we have come to that point in our relationship. I was having an incredibly difficult time getting through this one. And the movie had just started at this point. Bronson Pinchot starts at it again, and everyone takes turns threatening to pop him one. And the director chooses to film the scene with extreme close-ups of his face, which, like I said, it highlights his manic quality, but it just kind of comes across as wacky as well. And for whatever reason, Dinah projects into his head. I don't really know what's going on. He starts seeing monster faces, and Dinah turns to him. He clutches his head and screams. Dinah fills Laurel in about seeing into Toomey's head, and the dialogue is so forced, it's making me seriously consider quitting the podcast entirely. The horribly rendered CGI plane breaks through the clouds in a scene that they tried to make sense of, but just couldn't pull off. And I know that things are supposed to be getting worse for the characters, but they're only getting worse for the viewer, as the movie cuts to stock footage of forests and fields from overhead that are so jarring, I don't know how the director allowed them to be included in this movie. They arrive in Bangor, filmed in Bangor, and the actors have to talk about how badly things feel, how there's no smell in the air. In the novella, King can dwell on this, but people just talking about no smell in the air is not an engaging experience. They claim there's no sound to be heard, and I wish that was applied to me as I'm forced to endure Craig Toomey's origin story with his screaming father, which he then reenacts on David Morse before being shut down with a single finger from Nick. While in the airport, they start to realize that things are dreadfully wrong, and then to discuss dreadfully about how dreadful their situation is. And finally, Dinah puts her hand against the glass, states that she hears something, and despite the fact that she's blind, takes off her glasses to underscore the creepiness of her hearing something that we don't. Craig goes insane, and the rest of them play with their food, having a riveting conversation over whether the food is spoiled or tasteless. And at this point, I have to shut the movie off for a third time since I've started it. Okay, round 4. Pray for me, everybody. Albert is shot by Toomey, and Toomey is tied up and beaten by Nick, who is the only one who is taking this seriously. And just to remind us that he's British, the director makes sure that he uses bloody as an adjective and the phrase jolly good. Dean Stockwell, familiar with his time travel from his years as playing Al in Quantum Leap, monologues, dramatically, seriously hamming it up, about the time situation they have on their hands. It's a ridiculous speech. It's really over the top, but at least there's life to his performance. Stockwell is one of those great character actors who can chew scenery with just the right amount of control, where he's always acting and not really overacting. If anyone else had delivered that speech, it would have fallen flat, I guarantee you, but Dean Stockwell sells it. Later, Toomey tells us about the Langoliers, who despite his hands being tied up can't help but steal the scene. He dramatically rolls towards Dinah to tell the tale of his father's boogeymen. And we're treated to our second monologue in less than 5 minutes. And again, we have another actor who is clearly having fun hamming it up, really playing it up so the back row can see every tick and grimace. Toomey stabs Dinah in the chest with a knife, and it's good to know that a chest stab results with 0 blood. Nick's impromptu surgery comes next, and like most of the movie, it's flat, but the actor playing Nick is able to sell the intensity. Now it becomes a race against time in the most undramatic and unsuspenseful segment of television you've ever seen. Just as in the book, Ghost Dinah lures Craig onto the runway. The only thing that's good about this is the blood-drenched face of Bronson Pinchot. And in the distance, we see the power lines tumble and fall from the approach of the Langoliers. And in the middle of the runway, Toomey has a boardroom meeting with Stephen King himself. And then the Langoliers show up. This review and how I feel just feels like I'm stuck in the past where everything is flat because I don't have anything clever or humorous to say about this. It's just awful. It's awful early 90s special effects, which is a major problem with this movie. First of all, this is a movie that should never have been made in the first place. But if you're going to make it, make sure that you have the technology to make the title characters look anything other than awful. Anything other than the worst special effects that you have ever seen, because that's what they are. Plus, it doesn't make sense. We see dozens of Langoliers zipping around, but we're also led to believe that Toomey provided a distraction so the Langoliers wouldn't eat the plane or our other characters. But all we see are 2 Langoliers running after Toomey, which means that any of the other balls of teeth could very easily have gone after our characters. And it's the same thing that happened in the book. I didn't complain that heavily in the novella, but something about seeing it on the screen just points out its flaws. And the bigger problem here is that the movie just won't end. So I'm doing at this point what the movie won't and just stop. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. I'm throwing in the towel. Look, it is not like there isn't talent in this movie. I've already talked about Dean Stockwell. He's a bright spot in this otherwise flat, overdramatic miniseries. But standing alongside him are David Morse, who's one of those actors who manages to play quiet, hard, and compassionate men, which is a very difficult job to pull off. And Frankie Faison, best known as Commissioner Burrell from Simon West's The Wire, who has one of the best lines on that show, which is comprised of hundreds of great lines. If the gods are effing you, you find a way to F them back. This is Baltimore, gentlemen. The gods will not save you. I wanted to include the actual clip, but I couldn't because of the explicit content. But go on over to YouTube and actually hear him deliver it. It's awesome. Great show. Go watch it right now. And then we have Bronson Pinchot, who will always be best known, sadly, with diminishing notoriety as each year passes, as Balky Bartakamus from ABC's Perfect Strangers, a sitcom that used to air on ABC on Friday nights in the late 80s, early 90s during the legendary TGIF block on Friday nights. And then there's Tom Holland, the writer of Fright Night and Child's Play. These are classic, absolutely classic fun and effective horror movies. What I'm trying to say here is that there's talent here. There's talent. But the talent is never able to come together to make anything worth watching, which is unfortunate. And I think maybe it's because it's lifted beat for beat, word for word from the novella itself. I've spoken before in different podcast episodes that when it comes to adaptation, I think the screenwriter and director should adapt and not just cut and paste. A movie, or in this case, a television miniseries, is a different medium than the written word. Experiences play out differently from a performance than from reading it, which is a very internalized and personal experience. The reader can impart his or her own connotations, feelings, memories. It can be more or less profound based on the time it takes for a reader to read a text. Time can speed up or slow down if a reader chooses to take his or her time to fly through the pages. The words themselves are spells that, when cast, create magic that blooms within the reader. A written scene can invoke a particular emotion based on word choice or sentence structure. That same scene, if played out physically and superficially on the screen, will fail to land the same impact if it's not dissected for how it works, why it works, and what it is trying to impart upon the reader. And once those questions are asked, the adapter has to take the information generated from the answers to those questions and then has to determine how he or she can recreate the scene using the tools of the medium in which he or she works. That's the problem when people take King's dialogue and transpose it directly into a movie, or in this case, when Stephen King himself adapts his own work. This movie, this TV miniseries, is simply the novella recreated on screen, and it just doesn't work, period, because it's beat for beat the exact same story. So do I recommend The Langoliers? Absolutely not. I guess if you have nothing to do on a weekday night or a weekend night and you want to have some friends over for a laugh, I guess you could put it on. Even then, I don't know if you're going to get anything out of it. It's 2 hours too long. I just don't know why it was made, but it was, and here it is, and here's my review of The Langoliers. So, the good news is this is being released around the same time as the other reviews for 4 Past Midnight, so you don't have to wait. This is under half an hour, so all you have to do is just move on over to the next podcast and start listening to my review of Secret Window, Secret Garden. Thanks, everyone. Like I said, if you have not done so already, feel free to head on over to iTunes to subscribe and write a review. That would help me out greatly, and I will see you here next week, same King time, same King channel, Stephen King Cast.
Fee-fi, fiddly-I-O, fee-fi, fiddly-I-O, ho-ho-ho, fee-fi, fiddly-I-O, strumming on the old banjo. Fee-fi, fiddly-I-O, fee-fi, fiddly-I-O, ho-ho-ho, fee-fi, fiddly-I-O, strumming on the old banjo, strumming on the old banjo, strumming on the old banjo, strumming on the old banjo.